Welcome, everyone, to What the Force, and welcome to a new episode where we're going to be discussing some of the important things we need to examine and understand about the rise of Skywalker and kind of the journey of Ben Solo. And with me to do this discussion is Josh Johnson. Welcome back,
Hello.
Josh.
How are you?
Good. And you actually, I have to say, our conversations about the Maze and the Minotaur, which we getting more and more maze type imagery in Star Wars, and then what eventually led into my theory of Dark Union actually ended up coming to fruition, which is kind of crazy that that ended up happening.
All right.
It was weird. And you yourself have had I would say a very similar reaction to myself about the Rise of Skywalker. And I do want to give you some time to kind of set some context on that. How do you feel about the movie? And it's not like we're trying to bash the movie. This is just more like, it's a good frame of reference to say where our own notions will come from is kind of how we felt about the movie. And then when we talk about Kylo Ren, Ben Solo within the outcomes of this, I think that that's going to help us kind of reframe a lot of things for ourselves on what we need to take away from this, because part of the paradoxical treatment of this movie is that it doesn't actually complete his journey successfully. So that to me is one of those things. But okay. What are your
Yes.
feelings of the rise?
I don't trust it.
You don't trust it. Okay.
I don't trust it. That's it's like I told you right after I saw it, and like we were kind of talking before. To me, that's the main thing that keeps popping into my head is I don't trust it, and I don't mean that in a way necessarily that I think something conspiratorial happened, or like I don't mean trust in the sense of what I got on screen necessarily. Maybe I do a little bit. I mean trust more in what I've come to think Ben's journey was, what it meant to me, and what I know from messages I've received and gotten, what I know it's meant to a lot of men specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I say I don't trust it, I guess what I'm saying is it it didn't work. Like it didn't work for me in the way that I thought it would. I didn't come out of the theater happy is not the right word. Because there is all that stuff, right? I think a lot of us, regardless of where you were in fandom, we're just excited there was another Star Wars movie. And
Mm-hmm.
I think overall, I think it's obvious to me at least, like that after burn excitement just wasn't there. Even if it was, well, I mean, I don't know what I'm trying to say with that.
That's
It's
okay.
part,
So,
but go
what
ahead.
were you hoping for from Ben Solo?
Well, I mean, I was hoping for a step forward
Okay.
in how we were going to see things, like how I was hoping for another part of Star Wars to give me something to think about specifically as a man, and in terms of being a man and how I interact with feelings, the world, talking. I mean, as we were saying before, um, you were asking me questions and I'd kind of sit in silence for a couple seconds. And I'm like, MC, like this, I shouldn't be doing this. As a guy, I know that. Like, I know I shouldn't be sitting in silence. I know what I want to say, but it's stuck in my throat because since I was 4, I've been taught to be tough. I've been taught you don't talk about your feelings. You don't do that, right? Like all the cliches you hear. And
Mm-hmm.
I think for a lot of what was amazing about not just the character, but as everybody's saying, of course, the way Adam Driver played him and everything else is that crap, for lack of a better word, that boys grow up with was slowly being whittled away. And guys were starting to see themselves in him, whether they said it or not. And think we, I think we lost. I just we didn't get true representation of where it should go. You know what I mean? In some ways, it's almost weird to me that it's like they took us right to the edge and we're like, nope, you're not going to get to see how he's going to handle it from here. We're gonna, obviously we're gonna kill him like every superhero or sacrificial lamb, and that's what men are supposed to do. And when you get close to your feelings or whatever, then nope, don't go all the way. And not that, and I think that's the other thing. I didn't want there to be, not necessarily I didn't want, I wasn't expecting there to be this grandiose ending to Ben's journey that ended up giving me the answer. That's not what I'm saying when I say like we came so close, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it to me, I was just hoping that just the very fact of him living, right? Giving all the things around his character and all the, feelings everybody on either side had about it, like the conversation that would have had in the real world, right? That myth, that story could have propelled in real world was something that I think it was a diamond in the rough. It was something that would have been amazing. And those conversations obviously can still be had, right? It's not like because it ended one way, we still can't have that conversation. I think my point more is it would be a lot easier. I know it would be a lot easier for some boys and for men to be able to talk about it had it ended the other way, because then you're not having to start a conversation about Ben or Star Wars or the sequel trilogy. You're not having to start it around him. There's an easy way into that conversation, if that makes sense, had it gone the other way. Whereas now we see, okay, he ended the same way that most, heroes do, whatever. And so now to start a conversation like that, you have to dredge up that stuff and go against everything that's been done. Whereas had it gone the other way, you could just easily say, sitting around with your buddies, what'd you think of that? Like that he made it out, or some, do you understand what I'm saying? Somebody could have brought it up and it wouldn't have seemed so jarring in a conversation because
it's layered with the cultural weight of the sacrificial atonement.
Yes.
And I really do want to give people different words to talk about this with, because and I think that's part of like, weirdly, a responsibility I take very seriously when I podcast is giving people words to have conversations about these things in real life with their partners, with their friends, with their children, with their parents, like with everybody that they have in their circle. These things are actually very important, and they say a lot about our society. Anything that we consume from a mass media perspective is incredibly significant, and Star Wars itself, because it plugs into our humanistic story subconscious structure, is even more so. And that's why, for me personally, the Rise of Skywalker is paradoxically built. It fights itself internally and ends up only having, the barest bones of the mythology that was probably meant to be in there. So when we talk about sacrificial atonement, we're talking about how one can only receive redemption through basically blood sacrifice of your body. You can't live through the act of deciding to walk the path in a different direction. So many times in Star Wars, we talk about kind of the binaries of good and evil, and how they fall into, are you being selfish or are you being selfless? Very much Star Wars, at least in other aspects of canon, has really reiterated the idea that you can change and choose the light at any point in time. There is no, I would say, time limit on that. And that's one of the things that, especially out of The Rise of Skywalker, I actually appreciated, which is, as much as I dislike the regression that both Ben and Rey went under, to almost like, you know, in in Han Solo's words, I went back to the only thing I thought I was good at, you know. I, as much as I didn't appreciate the regression from a character arc perspective, it does show you that regardless of how bad you are, how much you're trying to seek power for the sake of whatever you think is required, because there's always reasons for people to seek power. We don't necessarily get those reasons inside of the movie itself, which is, I would say, kind of unfortunate, because my understanding is that Kylo is trying to end the conflict, right? In the most stupid way possible. But power itself is what people think that they need to make the world the way that they think it should be. This is the failure of Anakin Skywalker. And he realizes through his internal redemption, and we're going to talk about that moment specifically later on, that regardless of his position and power, the most powerful thing that he can do is seek his bliss and protect what he loves. Rose Tico is like her words rang through the universe, because the only way he could win is by saving what he loved.
Right. I mean, there's a lot there, MC. Where do you want me
Sorry.
No, because it's all good, and you're right. And so I'll just go back to that I was writing. So, like you said, in Star Wars, power's always the drug, the problem, the thing that people think they need to make things right, even if they are trying to do right. Like that. I mean, Adam Driver famously, you know, in interviews and stuff, has always said, "Look, Ben, you know, Kylo thinks he's doing the right thing, right, to him, and it's just the way he goes about it, and who knows what the right thing is to him at this point." But I think you see the same thing like in Dooku, Jedi Lost, right, where towards the end, like Dooku's trying to, you'll have to refresh my memory, but like, you know, he's trying to do right by his home world, if I remember all this.
Yep.
Right. But he's going about it in totally the wrong way. And so that's something that comes up time and again. And I do think it's interesting what you were saying about the binaries in Star Wars, and specifically for this. To me, I see a binary in how you deal with maybe fixing things, but not just in outwardly, right? Like in universe, but outwardly, right? Like Kylo's trying to take out the Emperor, right? Going about it the wrong way. But what plays off of that, I think, is then his internal struggle of, well, and power is all he thinks he needs, as specifically like as a male, right? And so the internal struggle, do you see what I mean? The binary of the end, like for me, the binary struggle of, I've been told since I was little, be tough, dust it off, get back in the game, like quit crying, don't cry, right? So I've been overloaded with that side of it, right? And so the binary there is like obviously like the physical, the masculine, you know, be tough, as opposed to just tell me what you're feeling, right? Like, like what could that have done? You know, like there's all this stuff in mythology.
But it played out actually in the story as much as you have to like squint to see it, right? In that he accepted the power in the assumption that he would, you know, fix the problems, solve the universe, right? But all he wanted was to be understood by the person he loved most in the world. That was all he wanted. He wanted somebody who could actually understand him the way Rey could.
Right. Like, and I think
And
that's the,
that's the internal thing
yeah.
that was like the thing that he couldn't understand what to do in that moment, or overall was like, so many times we end up thinking the solution is outwards, like you're saying. But
Hmm.
in many ways, understanding what is in the inside changes the outwards.
Hmm.
Like when we are able to actually put our thoughts and emotions and our shadows and deal with our internal workings, we no longer project those fallibilities on the outside world, on the people that frustrate us or on the people that we love, and have unrealistic expectations of everybody. We no longer seek to control those shadows out there in the world. We understand that control and that understanding and love emanates from self-love first,
Hmm.
and understanding the different pieces of ourselves.
Yeah. And that's what's so frustrating about it to me is that we were finally getting, to me, like we were finally getting that with Ben, right?
Yeah,
Like,
I think it's like down to I think it's down to the idea of, with Vader's sacrifice and death, atonement sacrifice. Because redemption is just the pivot point when you decide to change directions.
mhm.
The atonement is what's important. How do we go about making the world different? How do we come back from our journey in the underworld? How do
The
we,
harmony of it, right? Like
yeah, how do we
at one minute.
reintegrate
Yes.
our knowledge of the
Right.
darkness when we were in the underworld and when we were lost souls, and make the world a better place? Part of the problem was that Vader didn't live. And
Hmm.
we're okay with that because he was already the old man. But Ben Solo was a young man. And that's why part of this story will always feel like someone, and I have a real story about this. So I may cry because it's a friend.
No, it's good.
Part of the challenge is that Kylo Ren, Ben Solo, was redeemed. We got a few minutes of him feeling free and having his life together and knowing what he wants, and then he dies. It's like he was hit by a bus or something tragic happened,
Hmm.
and you're left questioning why. That's part of the tragedy, is like, what was the meaning behind this death? It's not even sacrificial atonement where, the story will live on. It feels meaningless, just like being at the wrong place at the wrong time, and being killed by a bus. I had a childhood friend, actually, and we grew up together. I actually did an episode called My Han Solo early on. It's only about 10 minutes long. It was one of my, I don't know, first 10 episodes. And I talked about how this friend was one of the first people that accepted my Star Wars rights. Like, I know that sounds so stupid, but like,
No, it doesn't. Not at all.
it was like my right to vote as a woman,
Right.
like,
Hmm.
but like my Star Wars rights, like I deserved to be in Star Wars as much as any fan. And he always made sure that I was allowed to play, that I could participate in all of the games we played. He always kind of had a darkness about him because of his childhood, and I would say probably some sort of things from his family and upbringing. He was incredibly passionate. He was a skilled athlete. He was one of the smartest and well-read people I knew. And while in university, actually spent some time living on the street because he was kind of followed by alcoholism and drug abuse his whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember getting a message from him just before he died, and he was just checking in on me, and he sent me a picture of an R2D2 like KitchenAid mixer or something like that, because
Really?
he knew I would like to see it. He checked in on my
Mm-hmm.
kids. And at that point in his life, he had finished his bachelor's degree, he had cleaned up his act, and he had gotten his law degree and was planning on visiting his girlfriend, who lived in a different city, for Valentine's Day, to just, have a nice Valentine's Day weekend and then head back to finish his articling for his to become a lawyer. He had already graduated.
Mm-hmm.
And while at a party together, he was just like, "Oh, hey, I'm good. I'll try some fentanyl. I've been good." And he died.
Wow.
And like, he had made his life better from all of the darkness that had followed him his whole life. Everyone said, "I thought he was doing better." He had so much promise. He was always, he always had all of this potential, and then he's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's part of it, is that we didn't get to see the end of his story. And because it was cut short, it didn't have resolution. We didn't get grief inside of the movie. We didn't know that he would still live on, because Ben is not only like someone who is as close to me as a brother, he also reminds me of my son in some ways. He also reminds me of my husband in some ways. To me, Ben Solo is all men.
Mm-hmm. Right. Like, I mean, I famously, when I was on your show last time, I've had a lot of people tell me, like, the part out of the 3 hours that I rambled or however long it was that they liked the most was when I got choked up and I said, like, I would get upset because, to me, like, when I saw Ben and what he was going through, and people were, "Oh no, he needs to, die, whatever." This was all before TROS. Like I saw him as my son, my 4-year-old boy. I'm like, no,
Mm-hmm.
that's Tristan. That's my son. Like, and even now, like, I think I don't think I know that's part of the reason I was upset coming out of it, is because I had looked forward to using this in the same way that I used Star Wars when my wife got breast cancer and my daughter was 5 and starting kindergarten, and people were telling her mom was going to die, and her and I would sit and talk about that. And I was looking, sorry.
It's okay.
We got through that. My daughter and I did, and my wife, obviously. And Kendra's fine now. I mean, she's cancer survivor. She's still on treatment, whatever. But my point is like, I was so grateful that at one of the worst times of my life, that the story that got me through so much growing up, all the little stuff when you're a kid that you think is the end of the world, Star Wars got me through that. And for it to come back around when I'm, in my late 30s and have a wife with breast cancer and a 5-year-old daughter and a 1.5-year-old son at the time, like, for it to come back around and get me through that, and not just get me through it, but really be an inspiration to my daughter. And, what she found in Ahsoka and Sabine and, and those characters, and gave me a way to talk. Because as a man, I was like, I would sit and I was jealous the way that my wife could just sit down and have a conversation with our daughter. And because I didn't really know how to talk about my feelings and different things, Star Wars opened that up for me with her at one of the worst times in all our lives at that point. And so I was looking forward to Ben Solo's journey being the same type of thing for me and my son, because
Mm-hmm.
he loves Kylo Ren. Like and it's like you and I have talked before, not just on the show, but about the famous George Lucas quote where I think it was Bill Moyers or somebody had asked him in the late 80s, like, don't you think it's weird or strange, or isn't it wrong that, little kids love Darth Vader? And Lucas, just without missing a beat, was like, why wouldn't they?
Mm-hmm.
Powerful. Like, little kids are shuffled around and told when to brush their teeth, when to go to bed, when to do this. Like, they don't have any voice. They don't have any agency. And all they see in Darth Vader is someone who's just going to go to bed when they want to, not take a bath, and, and do it their way. And he's like, so yeah, he's like, it might not to an adult seem healthy that they're, siding with the quote unquote villain, but to the kid, what they're doing is they're starting their, practice in their own agency, and how they, that there is another option, that there's things they can control. And Tristan loved Kylo Ren, and he would get so excited when we'd watch the movies and the scenes in The Force Awakens when Kylo's tearing up the Star Destroyer with his lightsaber or whatever, and he's like throwing his tantrums, like he latched onto that. And then when he found out that Darth Vader was his grandpa, because my dad's my son's best friend, like, he thought that was the greatest thing in the world, that the coolest guy ever in Star Wars for a little boy, Darth Vader, and now the new coolest guy is his grandson. And I was like, this is going to be so awesome. Years later, when we're able to sit down, and I'm like, but do you see how, like, Kylo came back around and he's really Ben? And that's, and that, I think, to me, is what hurt the most coming out of this movie, is not that I still won't have that with him, but that the male narrative in movies, in stories that were that popular, seemed like it was going to change. Seemed like for once we were going to get to see the guy come out the other side, and not that was going to be easy by any stretch.
Mm-hmm.
Like, had he lived, I'm not saying that at all, that had he lived, that, like what's the funny, wouldn't it have been great had Luke taken Vader back to Endor? Like, how weird would that party have been? Like, you always hear that.
Yeah.
But like, and I'm not saying like, had Rey taken Ben back to, wherever base they were at the end, or whatnot, like, but there were things they could have done. There were things that I was like, well, they maybe could do it this way. Like, they maybe could set it up where he ends up saving Poe from something, and Poe's like, oh, okay, I still can't be around you, but you did save my life that time that one of your members of your boy band tried to chop my head off or something. I don't know. Like, I had all these different scenarios in my head where it could have played out like that. But at the end of the day, like, I knew, like, if he does make it through this, like, there is going to have to be something where he is not, his atonement is going to take place, like, off screen or whatever. Like, it's gonna, but what a great way. Like, okay, then that conversation happens among fans in books, in comics, like, you know what I mean? Like, as opposed to, nope, it's done. He's, it didn't happen. And that hurts. That hurts as a guy. Like, I know there's a lot of dads who've messaged me, because right after the movie I sent out a tweet, and I think my tweet said something about, I'm sick of cowardice creators doing things this way. Like, I want something different for my boy, for my son. And I've had guys, come at me and they're like, movie's not going to raise your kid. I know that. It's I don't even listen to those, because you don't even understand what I was saying. But I've had a ton of men specifically, and women too, but a ton of men who've said, who've just said, I'm here for you.
Yeah. It's,
because they get it. Like, I thought I could get through this without crying, MC.
It's okay. But that's important. But, like, we've lost the potential of what Ben Solo could be.
Like, that's it. Like, that's like I said, I'm not saying obviously these conversations still can't happen, right? Like I'm not saying that this last movie didn't just ruin Star Wars, it ruined everything. Like how can society go on? I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying when I sent that tweet out, like I do think it was a cowardice act on somebody's part. And I use that word because I think it was the easy way out, right?
Yes.
Like I think as a creator, if you're going to sit down and write something or, create a great podcast like you have, or do different things, there are ways you can do that are easy, that will get you likes, that will get you, money if you're, write a certain way, whatever. And people know that. And you can take that way, or you can do like you've done with the podcast that you've created. You can tackle the hard stuff, the things that maybe somebody doesn't want to talk about, or, with a story, there's choices. When I was in college, like that's one thing I always kept hearing about, in a writing class that I took. It was like, writing is just making choices at the end of the day. Like what choices are you making, when you're writing? And for me, that's why I said that in that tweet, that it felt like a cowardice act to me from a creative standpoint, because it was the easy way out. Because had been lived there, you would have had to grapple with how the movie ends. You would have had to grapple with what stories do we tell from here, those types of things. And I think that's where the real boon of the hero's journey, if you will, would have come from, from community standpoint. Like that's what I know as a guy, that's what I would have brought back from it, is now, okay, now that we've had somebody live and he's got a lot of stuff he's got to deal with himself and things to answer for. And, however that's going to happen, at least it's got a chance to happen now.
A great first step was bringing back the woman that died trying to remove the galaxy of its evil black hole. That's a great first step,
right?
That's an open door, right?
Yeah.
Ben and Ray working together to dismantle the institutions of war that perpetuated.
That's the other thing. Like I cannot tell you how I've seen the movie twice, and the scene where he draws the saber from his back after him and Ray make the connection, I cannot tell you how cool that is and how much power that scene has. From I would have been able to take that and, sorry, are you hearing my dog barking?
Yeah, it's okay. What's your dog's name? I'm
sorry,
sure people want to know.
Jack.
Hi.
Sorry, he's in the other room.
We're pet friendly.
I'm
except
sorry.
I can't. I have pets. I have birds, but I can't have dogs or cats. So hearing them on podcasts is okay.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I don't even remember what I was saying now.
That scene was very powerful,
right? Yes, because that is. I know this might sound corny, but that is such a way to tell a 13-year-old boy, see, you can work with women and it's cool.
Yes.
Right? Like, look how cool that is, right? That you can make a connection with a woman, with a girl in a very deep way that is respectful, and you're both on the same level, and look what you can pull off. Like, that scene is just amazing from a 13-year-old boy's perspective, right? But I
also,
say that,
like, I love it. I think it's great. I've been listening to the.
I think a lot of people do.
I watched the cut of him as Ben Solo and her playing to "I Need a Hero" by Bonnie Tyler, like on repeat for like, I don't know, 3 hours one night, because like that is the fairy tale.
But think about what that says, right? That fan video that's going around like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's awesome. But what is, like, think about what that person created with that. And to me, the amazing message that one fan video says about what it is to be a hero, right? To work alongside a woman equally right? And look how powerful you are together, right? As opposed to, nope, you need to step out in front of everybody else, take the bullet, and that's just how it's got to go down. But we'll remember you and sing songs about you for, now till eternity.
But
like
we
a
don't
Greek
know
tragedy
that.
or something.
Like we don't know that. I mean, we might, right? We have to carry those things with us, but in universe, like that's part of what I argue broke the myth is that, like, to me, in universe, the universe needed to learn, because especially they didn't even in universe, based on the stormtrooper conversations between Janna and Finn, that all hope is not lost for the people that were born institutionally or were brought institutionalized into the darkness, right? The people within the First Order may not have had a choice ever along their lives. And isn't it more powerful to have the conversation and say, we want to give you the choice. We want to help you. We have compassion for you. When Rey gave Sheev Palpatine compassion and said, I will not kill you, that moment still gave me hope.
Yeah, right. Like, I mean, there were moments that obviously.
Well, and like when she stabs Ben, she refuses to kill him.
Yeah.
She heals him. I do want to talk about that moment because I think it's really, really important to talk about. I think that much of what we get out of The Rise of Skywalker for Ben is his internal yearning and connection is the pull to the light to Rey. He has compassion for her. It's all that TFA stuff that was originally in there that was enhanced and reiterated in The Last Jedi, but it has never changed. The best part of him and the best parts of him happen when he turns to the light and seeks compassion and love. And when he thinks he needs to have power and control, it's when he struggles and makes mistakes. I think that that's like really, really important to reiterate. So on the Death Star 2 fight, when Kylo and Rey are having their battle and Leia senses the fight happening, I still haven't figured out what they were trying to say with the quick edits and how it ends up playing out, but it seems like Leia distracts him and then Rey takes the opportunity to stab him with his own lightsaber. I still hate that. There's
weirdest, not weird, it just like when you and Ty were talking about that and y'all were like, so Leia kills him, like it does, you're right,
it's so weird. And I know that that's probably like not what was intended. I think that they were trying to say like Leia reaches out to him and tries to reach him one last time. And that's what that is. And that's what evokes the memory of Han. And like, it's basically the parental love that's coming back. But the quick edits end up causing unintentional damage, I think, in the narrative.
Right.
I don't believe that Leia would ever say she doesn't love her son, but we never get that in the movie, right? You know, we have this scene and then Ben is stabbed with the sword that originally did the wound to his spirit, that cut his spirit in half. That is like the words from The Force Awakens. I'm just repeating the words. He killed his father and he got stabbed in the same place. So from a Campbellian perspective, you know, the weapon that did the wound has to be the one that heals it. Right. So
the tilt stroke or whatever it is. Yeah.
Yes. By re-experiencing the wound, he now has a unique understanding of what it is like to be stabbed by the person you love most in the world.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you caught the cool fact too that go ahead, sorry, because
you say it's okay. I might not have. I'm not always smart.
Like I just thought it was cool. Like it was, people were talking about it and people were like, I gotta go see it again. I didn't notice that. Like that was the first thing I was like watching for when she started healing him. Like it wasn't just the wound she created then, it was his scar on his face, 2 heals. Like if you watch it, you know. So it was
so many ways. This was awakening from the evil old magician's spell. Okay. Mm-hmm. So we see this in fairy tales we see when, say, especially the hero is kind of under a spell, or the heroine is under a spell. This is the moment of being awoken from that, because his wounds, his emotional wounds, his physical wounds are all being healed by love.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't understate the importance of this moment. It is vitally, vitally important that we carry this moment with us. Like the compassion that Ray has for him in that moment, and then like basically reiterates it again to say, like, I wanted to take Ben Solo's hand, but regardless of that, she still healed Kylo Ren.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Potentially breaking the spell the evil old wizard had on him that basically was mind controlling him or putting him in a maze in the labyrinth that kept him in the darkness. Like, this is so important.
Right, because I'm not sure if you've seen in the visual dictionary too, like, the whole thing of I'm every voice you've ever heard inside your head, right?
Yeah.
But like whereas some people had thought, and that somehow the voices were coming from the Vader's helmet,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. He had that, like, in the visual dictionary, like it says, it never came from the helmet, right? Like that was just something he was holding on to, that, they make it very clear that no, that at least, for TROS, it was, that it was Palpatine, that it was, like they say, the voices inside his head, right? That my point is like you're saying, when she heals him, and, the disenchantment, whatever of, like, that love heals the wound, that she heals Kylo Ren, that you're right. Like, the old wizard's gone now, right? Like, and because Adam Driver
is such
Adam
a
Driver,
fabulous actor, you can actually see the mask lift, because he was only acting with his eyes before, and like using his mouth.
Yes. And the way he looks in that scene is just like, the man should win an Academy Award for that scene alone.
Mm-hmm.
Right. On top of the 8 million other scenes and other movies he's in, that, but the way he looks at her when she's healing him, with just the, like, what is this? Like, why, like, there's so much in that, just in his look, right? Like the confusion of, why would somebody do this? The realization of, oh, for love, like, I mean, just 8 million things that you can tell are going through his head that come across on a screen, because he's such a great actor. But yeah, like you're saying, it's important to understand too, that she's not healing at that exact moment Ben Solo, it's Kylo, right? Like,
yeah, she has compassion for her enemy. She has compassion for the person she has struggled and railed against and connected interpersonally with, and has been having, on-demand Skype conversations with. But she has compassion for him, even though he is still the supreme leader, even though he is standing in her way.
Right. Because at that point, well, I don't know. I was going to say, like, at that point, you could almost say Ray doesn't know that he's not going to just be like, okay, great, and then just go back to fighting her again. Like,
yeah, he doesn't. Like, she okay, leaves cool. with his ship, basically to disarm him, and allows him to limp away. Basically, she gives him compassion, and then she tries to sequester herself on Acto in a very, old Jedi failed way. She feels like she failed, but she did it anyways. It's so important, and it is part of the myth that is still there, that I need to hang on to, because it is so fundamentally important that love can overcome, so much.
Okay, and so you got me.
Sorry, what?
No, I said you got me, because before we started this, and you were talking me through just doing this, and I said, I don't know that there's anything I can hold on to, and I was still angry and upset and untrustworthy. But you're right. Like, there are parts that, no matter what you think of the movie, and if, like me, you don't trust it in general. There's just parts of the myth that Star Wars has that you're never going to be able to get away from.
Well, and these were specific choices that I think that they couldn't get away from because of,
Right.
the third act and having his atonement. And I do want to talk about that because it's vitally important about what he does and how he does it. And that's the truth of what we need to carry with us. But first we got to talk about the Han scene.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Josh.
No, it's okay. It's a rough one.
I know. So
I mean,
he stands there. She
great.
takes
It's
his
beautiful.
ship.
It's-
He is out in the middle of nowhere in the ocean on the Death Star 2.
Mhm.
And he looks at his lightsaber, and what happens? His father appears.
Hey, kid.
Hey, kid.
Like that, the minute like Kendra grabbed my hand and I lost it. I was just like, and the thing was, is I knew, like I had read some of the leaks or whatever, not da da da. Like I knew it was coming, but to hear it, to see it, to feel it was just, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Ford did such a great job, and Adam Driver did such a great job of almost doing the TFA scene in reverse. And I do think that it was clear for me that Han forgave his son by the touch on his face in TFA. But some people didn't get that, and they needed this moment. Well, it's important because, that is, as much as it's a repetition, the small changes in the words and the intonations and the order of the statements actually is what is important. So in the end, the order kind of slightly changes and the intonation changes and the touch happens earlier versus later. And in the end, we hear Adam say, or we hear Ben Solo say, because now he's Ben again, I know what I have to do. Have you ever been so sure that you would charge into hell about anything?
Right. A couple things. So, I mean, obviously, like you're saying, the way they reversed the TFA scene almost. I know some people have said online, it didn't work for them. They thought they were just, it definitely worked for me because of how much I both loved and hated the TFA scene. Hated in turn, hate's a strong word. Just how much it rocked me, right, in TFA. And for that to turn around now and go the other way. But like, I think the two things for me in that whole scene that were probably the most powerful was when he calls him dad. Because, like, dad
he called him
such
Han
a,
Solo before.
right?
Han Solo.
And whenever they would refer to Han, like in the earlier movies, when Snoke would or whatever, of course they're not, it was always your father, and this, that, and the other. But dad is such, as any parent knows, dad, daddy, mama, like they're just such personal words, especially when you hear them from your own kids, that, I think one of the coolest things, an interview with Brad Pitt on the Actors Guild studio, and they were asking him what his favorite, they have those series of questions at the end, and they were like, what's your favorite word? And without even missing a beat, he said, daddy, and it is like, but anyway, so that hit home on a lot of different levels, and not just as a parent. I think anybody could see how personal that's, like, in one word, the shift, there could have been a ton of different things at that point that the character that Ben could have said to Han, but just the one word dad, right? Like says it all. And this was the one that really got me, was he's just trying to tell him he loves him, he's dad, and he wants to say, I love you. And he tries, and you could even see it, like, because on the second time I watched it, like, that's one of the things I went in wanting to see was, and he does, because he's Adam Driver, like, because they probably, put that in, like, you can see on his lips, like, he's trying to say, I love you. And for a guy, like, that's an old, like, 1940s, like, you don't tell your mom you love her, but tell your dad you love him. Like, really? Like it's still one of those things that thankfully has gone by the wayside for the most part. But I know for a fact, I know I've told my mom that I loved her more than I have told my dad. And not
Mm-hmm.
that because not that there's any, not that, not that I don't love my dad as equally as I love my mom. It's just the culture I'm brought up in. Like, like if you're in a crowd, like, especially growing up in the South, like you're supposed to be a mama's boy, like you're supposed to
Mm-hmm.
protect mom. Like, of course you tell your mom you love her and give her a hug in front of your friends, but your dad, really, dude? Like, so that when he does that and how he struggles with it, right? And not for reasons that I'm giving personally, but for reasons in character of what he had done to Han, and,
Mm-hmm. Because he never hated his father.
and right, no, and then for him to struggle with that, and before he can say it, right, for Han to just turn around and be Han and say the same thing that he says to Leia,
I
like,
know.
yes, it's a cheesy, yeah, right? Like, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like,
But that's
some
his way
people,
of
like, it's a
saying I
cheesy
love you.
exactly, right? Like that,
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
and I know people have been like, oh, but that was just yeah, it's a callback. Yeah, it's this, that, and the other, but it's also Han. It's who he is. It's also a father and a son not having to say, it's a father and a son being able to be men, not having to go through the uncomfortable, cultural baggage, and just being able to sit and be. Like, I thought of there's a very famous Robert Bly, the guy, you and Ty did a great episode on him
Yeah,
and stuff that talked about
he's from the Mytho Poetic Men's movement, and
it. Right.
wrote a little book on the human shadow.
Mm-hmm. But he has a great it's a all these things, Campbell, him, whatever, like they have all these lectures and different things you hear different stuff on, and I think it's actually he's written it in a book too. But anyway, he talks about old fairy tales and how men are seen in them and this, that, and the other. And he's on this one fairy tale, and he's talking about his dad and him, and how in fairy tales, and then he's talking about too how for men, and he uses the example of his dad, that there are things he wished he had been able to say to his dad. And he talks about how there are times that even if he didn't say them, that he wished he could have just sat with his dad. Because he said, for whatever reason, and he's like giving all these psychological papers and examples, and whatnot, that
Mm-hmm.
that men are okay to just sit and not say anything and have felt something. It's a really cool talk that he gives. But my point is that Han and Ben have that moment, right, where nothing needs to be said. When Han says, I know, it's just a father and a son sitting on the back porch, knowing that they both love each other, knowing what's happened, knowing that they've said all they need to say, and we're right, because of the movie, it's 0.003 seconds, but you get what I'm saying is metaphorically, like, we're just going to sit here and be father and son and know that we love each other and know everything is okay now, right, between us, and everything that's happened in the past. And the fact that the other aspect of that whole scene too, for me, is obviously, I think he even says, doesn't he, Han says, I'm just a memory, or Ben, like, it gets conveyed somehow that it's not like it's Star Wars, right? So it gets conveyed that this isn't a Force ghost or something like that, right? Like, he
Yeah.
says something about the fact that this is his memory,
This is his memory. Yeah.
right? And so there's that whole thing too of, for as real as it is, it's also been taking that first step
Mm-hmm.
at atonement, at one-ment, right? At getting back to who he was. Like, he woke up, right? And now he's taken the first step, right? Like, who's the first person he needs to atone with, talk to, like, who's the first person he needs for him, the first barrier? It's going to be Han, right?
Mm-hmm.
And given what happened. And so I really appreciated the fact, and I love the fact that it wasn't some kind of hokey force ghost, or, however else you could have done that in Star Wars universe. I think it was interesting, very well done that it came from him, you know.
I want to reiterate what I think is really important about the fact that it wasn't a force ghost and it was actually part of his own memories, because sometimes we have things that happen in our lives that we're not able to, have, true apologies to people. They either pass away or they're no longer in our lives. And the first step to moving on and moving forward is figuring out how to forgive yourself first.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so vitally important to being able to exist and do actions, moving towards the light, as it were, because that's part of the deception of the dark side, is that it keeps you there because the guilt associated with not finding forgiveness of yourself is there. It keeps you there because you're like, I could never atone to my father because my father is dead. That's a trap, and it's not true. You need to forgive yourself to move forward.
Yeah, your father, like Han would want that, like, obviously, right? Like, and for him to realize, for Ben to realize that and be able to do that, like, I've seen people talk about that scene, and I think it's really good you're talking about it like that, because it was his first step, right? Or one of them. Like, without that, there could be criticism leveled that, oh, well, he didn't really, but that to me, again, when I saw that, I'm like, God, I know, like, because again, like, I was spoiled going in, but in the back of my head, like, I'm going, no, this screening, this one that I'm sitting in right here, this is going to be the one where they, like, snuck in, he lives, and, because it was just, everything was,
it was so important as a scene.
leading up to it, right? Yeah, it was just, it was a crucial scene if we're going to get to Ben lives, and he's got other stuff he needs to do. But my God, look at this. He's already forgiven himself. He's already had that conversation with Han, and it honestly made everything that comes after so much. And this is the thing, right? Like, as a guy, that conversation with his dad, and like I was saying, the just sitting there, the not having to say I love you, even though he tried, like, the weight of that off his shoulders made everything after that, when he's charging in, to go help Rey, so much more powerful to me, because he wasn't dragging any of the baggage of Han or any of that with him. And I don't know, I need to go back and think about it more, but I really do, talking with you, I think that for me got conveyed really well, right? Like, had he just thrown his saber into the water and not seen Han, and we just somehow knew he was, Ben Solo again, and he puts on his, cool looking long sleeve black shirt that everybody's going on about and runs in, it wouldn't have had the same weight to it for me, given what I got was so much better. Does that make sense, right? That somehow they got across to a guy, to me. And I keep saying that, to a guy, because I'm sure, and I don't know, but, like, I'm sure for women, like, it was like, of course that's what he's going to do. Like, and this goes back to, like, I don't know how to talk about my feelings or how these things should go, and right? Like, I'm sure you're, like, going, well, of course, Josh, that's the whole point, right? But, like, it just, it meant a lot that he was able to, that he had that I could see sitting there in the theater going, here we go. Like, I know everybody in this theater is going, Ben's getting ready to go in and, open up a can, but you have no idea how much, because he's already had a super duper weight lifted off of him.
Exactly. Like, what did you think of the lightsaber throw? I'm, like, of two minds on it. I feel like him stripping the vestiges of the old and the Supreme Leader and the everything that he was before was very powerful. Like, so chucking his lightsaber into the ocean, removing his cape, never taking his helmet back again, like all of the vestiges, his tunic, like literally he lost everything that made him Kylo Ren, and just wore what was underneath his good boy sweater with the hole in it. Like, I love it. But I feel like his like sacred heart is in that lightsaber. The showing that he was taking on or attempting to take on the suffering of the galaxy through his actions. And I think it would have been more powerful had he been able to heal his crystal.
Right. I had ever since, and I know people have brought this up, ever since the Ahsoka book, which I think is the first time in, canon that we like, that you can heal a crystal, and the whole thing with the Vader comic of how you bleed one and how cool all of that is and amazing all that is from just a story angle. Like, yes, I was hoping that's what would have ended up happening, right? That he somehow
then had a white
unbled his right, exactly, right? Like he healed it in the great episode you did with that whole Sacred Heart thing.
Yeah,
I do think it's interesting though, and I haven't looked into this enough, but there's a comic, and I don't know if you've seen this. There's a comic where Luke, and timeline wise, I want to say it's sometime between in canon Empire and Return of the Jedi. But Luke goes in the comic, Luke somehow comes across these two sabers that are identical, like in design to Kylo's, the crossguard saber. There's two of them, right? And it all has to do with what was Han's other girlfriend's name?
Sana?
Yeah, right. She and Luke, I need to shorten this. Santa's after these sabers. Somebody's paid her to find them, if I remember the comic right. And Vader finds out that they're there. So Vader, Luke, and Santa are all involved in this. Long and short of it is, for some reason, these sabers come in this particular comic. The sabers are two, right? Like Luke gets one. It's pretty interesting. Luke gets one. And he tells Santa, he's like, there's supposed to be another one. And she's like, I don't know. I was just told to bring it here or something. And Vader at the same time gets the other one. And he's like, there's supposed to be two. And the stormtroopers, or whoever are like, no, like this was anyway, by the end of it, they both, right? Even Vader, they end up hunking these sabers because something to do with the crossguard saber and how it's built is like super dark side for what it's worth.
I
know it is. And it's something to look into. And it's just, when you said, what did you think of it? Like they almost in the comic make it seem like if you have one of these things, you have no hope, right? Like you're always going to be pulled to the dark side if you have one of these crossguard sabers. I know it is. It's in this little known, it's a Star Wars comic canon, but it's like just in this little, but anyway, and I've read it, I think twice, trying to go like, okay, and there's really nothing. It's almost like something they threw in and kind of set up if they wanted to use, you know what I mean, later on. And I don't know. I would need to go back and look at it, but I did think that was interesting, just from a canon,
I'm choosing to take it like he was trying to strip away all of the vestiges that remained of Kylo Ren.
Right, exactly.
And and we see that, like, no helmet, no tunic, no cape. Like, we see all of who he was stripped away, and then he is just, and even his face transforms because he now uses his facial muscles, which is awesome. And so this is the part that I kind of want to talk about, because like he makes it work. If you look too closely at the details of how he gets to Exegol, it doesn't make sense. So we're just going to kind of skip over that little bit and just not talk about it, because I tweeted about it because it was frustrating me. But he makes it, and he shows up on Exegol, and he literally like has Lando's gun, apparently. Again,
right?
don't look too closely at the details. This movie doesn't make sense if you look too closely at some of
Yeah.
the aspects of it. But he charges into, hell, the going to the underworld. He has no easy way in, so he has to basically climb into the underworld.
Right. And I'm forgetting, does he go down? Because
He goes
the
down
other
the chain.
Okay, that's what I was going to say. Like, I was mad they didn't use the chain metaphors and stuff more, but I think he did climb down the chain.
He climbed down the
to
chain because he
actually get down
jumps
the other
into
side.
it, and then he's in it. Like, to me, now that like I've seen more of Exegol, it looks like a labyrinth internally.
Mhm.
So
Uh-huh.
it's really fascinating that metaphor continued for him
Mhm.
specifically. He meets on his road to find Ray. The the Knights of Ren. We don't know how they got there. We don't know why they turned against him specifically. We don't have a lot of information on what happened in this moment, but suddenly
Right.
they're against him. And at the same moment, Rey is being told she needs to kill Palpatine so that he can join with her a la Dark Union, and she can become Empress Palpatine of the galaxy and finally end the destructive conflict. One way or another, we are getting some sort of union. And
Somehow it's happening.
she doesn't want to kill him, but she agrees because she notices that Ben Solo is there and she's very happy about that. And she does the scene that you referred to earlier where she hands him the lightsaber from behind her back, which is like such a cool scene to like
It is. It's
take
like
home with you.
it's one of those cool new Force things that you're like, that works on 8 million levels. That is awesome.
Exactly. And then they have basically a redux of the throne room fight. He's fighting
But
the
you're
knights.
forgetting the Han. Like, sorry.
Sorry. I got it. Yeah, the Han shrug. We got the Han shrug. I'm sorry. Yeah.
God, it's so cool the way he's just like, hey. I love it. It's so good. So good. Sorry. Okay. Yes. And then
No, it's important to point out because he is totally Han Solo's baby boy, making him proud, charging stupidly into conversation. And he does the shot behind him of the one.
Yes, when he's running and he just,
he does the shot.
Right? Yeah, like Han does in TFA when he comes out of the tunnel and he's just like, yeah.
Yeah, and just like the charging down the hall, like reckless abandon, like, doing what you got to do.
Don't you wonder if Driver like sat, or I mean, he's just Adam Driver. He probably just flips a switch in his head when he can just turn on Harrison Ford as far as his body.
I think he probably did a lot because there's like moments,
watch different scenes, movies, and
like there's moments when you can.
I think you would have to, right?
It.
Like, yeah,
like earlier on in the movie when Hux is like, okay, well, let's destroy Pisana, and he's like, he puts up his finger,
puts his finger in his
like
face,
exactly like Han Solo puts up his finger to silence anything and just like walks away. Like, yeah, because like in some ways we are the best and the worst of our parents.
Right?
Like, because it's the genetics and it's the raising and the things that we don't want to teach them, we end up teaching them, and the things that we're trying to teach them, they don't end up learning. And, that's just like part of it. So they end up fighting and then they end up being together, trying to face Palpatine. And I want to say, like, the most important thing that Ben Solo brought Rey, because, she had both lightsabers and she had, the ability to, I guess, face him off already without Ben Solo running into the darkness. But, what Ben Solo brought Rey was hope, was you're not alone. I'm here for you. Take that strength, take that inspiration, the inspiration to fight Palpatine. I think I would have preferred it if they fought Palpatine together, but that handoff, because literally nothing he does other than killing the Knights of Ren and inspiring her to fight is what happens before he gets, thrown into the pit and sucked out energy and then thrown in the pit. Like, he brings her hope emotionally. You can see it on her face.
Yeah, it's the part that one of the many things that Raylo's called again, and just by watching the trailers when we
Like,
you know
that's a Ben
we got
Solo
that
face that she's giving
right.
him.
Hmm.
Yep.
Right. And no, you're right. And you're making me think of you're making me talk about my feelings, MC. But like now I kind of like this part more. Not this part, but this because it does. You're right. Like it reminds me personally of when Kendra got cancer and we had a 1.5 year old and our daughter, and I had no clue what to do. And like the very real thought that my wife could die and I'm alone with two little ones. And how do I explain that? And I'll never forget, like, neither one of us knew what was ahead. Obviously, we didn't, and she didn't. And I'll never forget sitting the first time I took her to chemo, and I'm like, I don't know what to do, babe. And she's like, you're here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's all I need. You're here. And
And that's sometimes all we can do when somebody is alone in the darkness, facing their
right,
own devil, their own
it's just,
demons, is just be with them
mhm.
and know that you are there for them.
What,
Let them know
yeah,
that.
and whatever that means, like, even just try. I keep bringing up the word trust in this connotation, like a good way, like just that at that time personally for me, that like I just had to trust in the fact that me being there was enough, even though I might not know everything that meant to my wife at the time. She had
Mm-hmm.
said it, and I knew, because I trusted her enough and knew her well enough, that I knew when she said that she meant it, even though I may not have known everything it meant to her, if that makes sense. And just trusting in that love and that feeling and that emotion and sitting with it. And I think is exactly what you're getting at with that scene, that it was one of the reasons that was a great scene, is because that's she just, I forget how you worded it, but that Ray just needed him there. Sorry.
Yeah. Because like sometimes we have to fight our own battles, but
Yeah, right. Like
knowing that we have people that care about us and are cheering us on, or we're willing to run into hell for us, even if they can't help
Mhm.
us in that moment, is more powerful than maybe Ben fighting her battles for her.
Right. And I think too, along those lines, you're making me think of again that moment in my life and the doubts I had, just when I realized, like I just got through saying, when I realized, no, I trust Kendra. She trusts me. Like, we got this. I think it's really cool how easily and quickly Ben in that scene dispatches the Knights of Ren. Right. It's like
Mm-hmm.
there's a way I could read
He
that.
struggled with the Praetorian Guard previously. Like
Right.
there was
And
a lot more struggle.
he struggled with those guys. Like, they were putting a whooping on him right before him
Mm-hmm.
and Ray connection. And right as they're closing in, he like, that's when the connection gets made. And then it's like, oh, you know what, guys? You don't really matter. Like, and this is really good for me, MC. Thanks. But that's how I felt. Like, all the doubt, everything just goes away. And,
Because you're like
you're in,
the key, and this is the Joseph Campbellian grain of truth that we are going to take away from this movie, is that following your bliss makes you stronger. It is,
yes.
you're on the edge of a knife's point and you could tip either way or the other and be swept away with passion. But if you were running full bore into love, into bliss, into joy, it will mean something. It will.
Yeah.
It's
Can I
not that
just say,
you won't have struggles, but
no, exactly. Right. Like,
it gives you the power and the strength to carry on.
the calm, the
Yeah, and the
real
focus. You have a
center.
place to focus in
Exactly.
a sea of chaos.
Right. In a sea of hooded, whatever those things were, chanting
Yes.
and,
Yeah.
but yeah, no, you're right. And it is neat. And I do just have to say they didn't utilize bliss and pride as much as I thought they would. in those perspectives.
I mean, I think there may have been a different story being told originally,
Yeah.
and those things meant something. And
I mean, obviously, right?
you know,
Like,
they kind of end up talking about, you know, what is bliss, you know, in that conversation Zori and Poe end up having. And then pride, it's about him being number one. It's about him seeking pride. It's just covered kind of by some other expositional narrative that it didn't get a chance to really fully symbolically impact. Ben gets yeeted into the pit, never to be seen again. And after the forced dyad soul sucking by Palpatine that heals him, weakening both of them, presumably. And then, you know, Rey ends up calling upon the Jedi to be with her because she shouldn't have to do this alone. I think that that's the message I'm taking with that. Ben didn't want her to be alone, so perhaps that's what she took from him showing up. Reflecting Palpatine's power back on him. I want to save what I think that means for a different time. I think I have struggles with destroying your own darkness. I have struggles with that. So I don't want to talk about it right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it kills her in the process. This was a sacrificial atonement of her bloodline, right? She sacrificed her life. As much as we identify with Rey, she had darkness within her. She had the potential for just as much evil as anybody else. And but she chose light, and they still ended up, you know, saying that's not enough. Ben crawls his butt out of the pit, broken-legged, bleeding, destroyed, holds her in that PETA position of compassion, holds her close to him, calmly breathes, just breathes, calling upon what he had learned from her, the tools that she had already given him, that compassion and love can save the one you love, regardless of what happens, and effectively ends up giving up his life for her, saying the world is better with you and not me. And I will never understand that choice because part of it is part of the symbolism of having them both live is that people should see both of these two just as they kiss, equals. In our hearts and in our psychology, we both have feminine and masculine aspects. Rey did the masculine thing by fighting Palpatine and removing of the evil, and Kylo did the feminine thing of compassion and love and healing. These two things are aspects of ourselves symbolically on screen. And although I think from a mythic perspective, they're trying to say that together there's an alchemical union of the masculine and the feminine that exists ongoing in Rey. It doesn't play out that way from a visual telling perspective, and kids won't pick that up, that they are now whole, because one is gone. So now it's empty. And I just, like, that's a major critique from a mythic perspective, that as much as, you know, men, women, adults might understand, like, he now lives in her theoretically and all these things, and spiritually, and there's a lot of, like, the Christ, the Savior type, the Spirit now lives in me, you know, the Holy Spirit stuff. It falls flat from a symbolic perspective because it has to visually happen for us to understand. And it didn't. If she had kind of like sucked his spirit into her and like then she became whole or something, like that would have been more closer to alchemical union. To me, it just still kind of doesn't successfully get there because he saves her. They kiss. There's a moment of pure joy. He finally did the thing that he has always wanted to do, which was save someone he loves. He followed his bliss to that moment and then understands the joy associated with it. It's not pleasure that he feels. He feels absolute joy at the fact that she's now living. And then he dies. So the alchemical union to me didn't happen. Anyways.
Yeah, no, you're right. And it's, I mean, because you know me and we've talked about this, but the four pictures I kept throwing up all fall and over the summer from creative mythology with the solar king and the lunar queen, and I mean, you can map that from the hand touch scene in TLJ all the way up to this exact point. And yes, there is a blending of the two and two become one, but it's like you're saying, it's symbolic, and there's things that needed to happen for it to work from a mythology angle
Yeah.
that didn't, for it to come off.
Yeah, because it needs to be fairy tale in nature to be successful. It needs
Exactly.
to exist in the cognitive, oh, this is the message we need to take, but also physically on screen. Like, we can tell the union and the combination and the healing happens in Beauty and the Beast because the beast is transformed and things change because of the outcome. And the transformation happened, but only halfway. There was no finalization of the union between the dark part of ourselves, the light part of ourselves, the masculine and the feminine. There was no integration in the heroine's journey of the masculine and the feminine. This was just the feminine existing with masculine features. I struggle with it because there needed to actually be a visual parallel to the cognitive understanding of the mythology.
Campbell even makes a point in creative mythology that, like, one of the things he says is like long and short of it is, he's like, at this point, like, they should have had a kid, like, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not saying Star Wars, I'm saying in the book, right? Like Campbell says, one of the things,
the outcome of that is that they produce the next generation, and that is the product of the union. Yes, and
which
maybe,
is why
I mean, maybe she's pregnant. I don't like it. I don't like it. You know, I don't like it. So,
but I understand why some people have gravitated to that, and you know,
I mean, it's not above Star Wars to have done that. George likes a virgin pregnancy, or a because it's very it is very mythological itself. It means that this child is a hero.
But in the same way that they were, I would think this in the same way that if Star Wars was going to propel the myth forward, that and they were going to do something like that, then they would have the two there with their child. You know, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a full integration of the dark side and the Skywalkers, and the understanding of how Palpatine was dark and Rey was light, and Anakin and Luke, had darkness and light in them. Like it would, and then Ben was dark. Like, it would sync up, and then would say to the audience, they're going to figure out how to make the galaxy better together. You know? Yeah. And to me, that's what's missing from a mythological perspective, and why I refer to the myth being broken, because it doesn't do that successfully, thus completing kind of what Joseph Campbell would say would be required for this, solving. You can squint and you can see it if you want to, from the kiss and from the healing integration of Ben's spirit and life energy into her. I just don't think it's successful to actually say that's exactly what happened. And then there's no atonement and elixir being brought home to the community from Ben Solo. So that leaves us with a dissonance, at least for me, that the story wasn't done. And so that's partially why we grieve, right? We grieve because it feels like this person, and I'm saying again, Ben Solo is part of us just as much as Rey is part of us. And what happened to them in the movie maybe didn't align to what we want to see in ourselves. And so what do? Like, the grief is real because, they are us on screen. We are them. you know? They are part of us because we identify with different aspects of them, and they didn't get to finish the story. So our job is to live the lives that they couldn't, right? Our job is to live our lives like Ben Solo running into hell. Don't be afraid. Be full of bravado. Live the most Ben Solo. Don't question it. Be like, what would Ben Solo do? Don't even question whether you have the power, you have the skill, you have the, whatever. Just run like hell towards your bliss because he couldn't anymore. You have to live that. You have to live that. That's what by not finishing his journey, we become self-inserted. It's like in and I've learned a lot from my musical experts.
Yeah, but I don't think that's by design.
No, but I don't care if it's not by design. It's what has happened.
I know. Exactly
so I'm saying this is what has happened. It is like when in the music you have an unresolved note. Our brains want to resolve the note for, a piece of music. If it's left unresolved, it grates on us. So the only way to get past that feeling of, needing resolution is to actually say, I am this character, this little piece that I loved about Ben Solo, or that I identified with, or that I needed. Now I take forward and say, I'm going to be brave. I'm going to run into hell to follow my bliss. I'm going to tell my father I loved him, especially the men. Tell your fathers and your sons that you love him. That's something that we can take home.
Right. And that, like, you've drugged me through this from 2-3 hours ago when I was like, MC, I don't want to get on and try and talk about this stuff because it's hard. And there's a lot of stuff I haven't talked about and that I won't talk about. But yes, you are right, because the myth was broken. The myth was left undone. And whereas I've been struggling, I think, since I've seen the movie with, how everybody has, do I quit Star Wars? And like, for me, I never thought that was a possibility just because of everything that Star Wars has meant to me. But I was at a place where I was angry. I didn't trust it anymore. I don't want to say I didn't trust Star Wars. I just didn't trust this movie, like I had said. But what you're saying makes a lot of sense to me, because it is the reason all week when you've been trying to get me to talk about this stuff. And then I'm like, okay, I will. I like I said, it hits different, obviously, the same way it hits different for women, it hits different for men. There are things that hit similar, but I do know it really has hit boys and men hard, and hopefully it doesn't end the story that you're trying to tell in your own life, right? Like, it doesn't stop what you were progressing towards. Like how I was saying, I was hoping to use this with Tristan, with my son. Like, it would be stupid for me to go, well, the movie didn't do it, so why am I going to now? Like, that is completely the opposite of what happened, right? And I know that.
But this is part of the conversation, Josh. This is part of the conversation, and it makes the conversations harder, yes, but more meaningful. What we have to say
in conversations and hard feelings, guys don't do that good.
But what we have to say is, like,
and I hate to. Can I just say too? I hate that I'm acting like we're all Neanderthal knuckle dragging. Like, I know that, right? Like, I know that guys know how to do this stuff. I'm just saying.
You're literally talking about your feelings for 2 hours on my podcast. So that's not true all the way, but I totally get the reticence. I understand.
Like it is. And it's you're right though. Sorry, go ahead, because you're so right. Like it can't stop the good that was coming from it. Right? Like, if the movie felt like a train going 90 miles an hour and you're getting excited and then it hit a brick wall, don't let that destroy the, like,
Yeah. Okay, so here's the thing that they didn't realize that they were doing when they decided to stop Ben Solo's narrative, not continue it on in the movie, and actually talk about it. Okay, what they did was they actually created a symbolic martyr of a generation. He is a Christ figure. We get no resolution.
Well, and the thing is they did it like in a, how do I want to say this? Like, the way we're used to seeing martyrs in real life, right? This was a creative martyr. So
yes.
you basically have kicked off, hopefully, a generation of young men that will know it's okay to express their feelings, that will feel strong in doing that, will understand what, at least for, will understand, even if it's just a lightsaber being passed scene, what it means to live harmoniously and powerfully with a woman on an equal footing, and be able to create the things that need to be created. And
the most important thing is that, like, if they had given Ben Solo a happy ending in this, he may have faded from history over time. But
you're right.
By the sacrifice, there is the conversation will not end around him. It will be controversial. There will be continuous conversations. The martyrdom of him for some, and the focus on his bad, things that he has done as a character will continue on, and that will propel more discussion. And I'm not saying that was purposeful. I entirely believe it was accidental. I don't think that they understand the myth by which they're handling, or at least the people that made this decision. The myth is, like, in some ways sacred. And if you mess with it in the wrong way, it may produce unintended results. But what we can do is carry the conversation forward and talk about him in the way that we need to talk about him. That he was a product of institutionalized evil. He had no choice in so many ways to resist that evil. The voices inside of his head for all of eternity. That's in the movie. We know every voice inside your head. So how long have those voices been around? Has he ever had a choice? Is he just a product of what Palpatine made him? That's very poignant to our time and place. Are people who commit crimes, but are people who commit crimes just a product of the society that we give them and the opportunities that we give them? There are so many interesting conversations that we can have because of how this narrative ended up playing out. So don't lose that.
I'll try not to.
It's important.
No, no, it is. And you're right. You're right. I know you're right. I just have to be honest in that, like, I am still at this point right now, like I said, it still hurts, right? You're right. And I know that, but for me,
it's not going to not hurt for a while because he was already part of you, and you have to acknowledge
and that's all
that.
I'm trying to say is, yeah.
And you have to find a way to put those feelings where they need to go. Recommended previously on a podcast that people listen to The Theater of War by Brian Dories, and I recommend that. Either read the book or listen to the fantastic audio book read by Adam Driver. I have had tons of feedback in the last little while that it has really helped them understand, because Brian not only talks about losing the love of his life, but also like betrayal that he understood from the Theater of War project, and how he was helping heal active and non-active military personnel through the invisible wounds of war. And this is a tragedy, and the only way that we get through it is by talking about it. There's betrayal because of how we were told the narrative would play out. There is the grief and loss of a character we identified with in in some ways a very heartless way without giving us emotional resolution on screen. And then there's the fact that this is the end of the saga. We don't expect to see Adam Driver back on screen. We don't expect to see these characters be able to have the resolution that they need. So it's like, not only are we grieving the loss of a character, but we're grieving the tragic, what feels like in some ways meaningless loss of a character that we've come to love. And
right at the end of a story,
which we have no way to fix. It's very much like someone we loved, someone we cared about was taken away from us. And there's an aspect of betrayal in that, like, what went wrong? How did this happen? How, not knowing why, right? And so those feelings are all going to be mixed up together. And I'm going to read this, and I'm not as good as Adam Driver. So again, go and listen to the Theater of War, but this is an excerpt from it. For weeks after her death, all I wanted to do was talk about it with anyone who would listen. But after her memorial, fewer and fewer people wanted to hear the story. Nevertheless, I kept telling it in all the graphic details, even as people seemed to recoil from the manic intensity of my monologue. I needed friends and family members and even strangers to know her death was brave and poetic and transcendent and beautiful, and that it was possible for someone to die fully conscious and connected with those she loved. In the following years, whenever I returned to the ancient Greek tragedies I had studied in college, the conflicted, the suffering characters in the plays spoke to me with an immediacy that I could never anticipate before caring for Laura. I took comfort in knowing that I wasn't the first person who had experienced compassion fatigue or who had hesitated to act decisively in the presence of extreme suffering, or who had felt ambivalent about helping someone die, or whose grief manifested itself in a withdrawal from the world. If the ancient Greek tragedies could speak to me directly, I reasoned, they could speak to anyone who had lived the human experience they described. And if there's one thing I've learned from listening to the audiences all over the world respond to Greek tragedies, it's that people who have come into contact with death, who have faced the darkest aspects of our humanity, who have loved and lost, and who know the meaning of sacrifice, seem to have little trouble relating to those ancient plays. These tragedies are their stories. Part of the human experience is suffering and loss, and it allows us to have compassion for others who are in the similar situation. We have to talk about Ben Solo. We have to talk about what we lost. We also need to connect with others who are going through this. It's part of how we heal. It's how we move forward with the elixir, with the truth that we can make our world what Ben Solo saw when he ran into hell to make it happen. We talk about the hard things and we bring it into our real lives.
That was beautiful. I would 100,000% agree.
Okay. What I wanted to do was actually listen to something that my friend Ali Nasser performed on the What the Force show just a year ago. She had written a song for Ben Solo and performed an acoustic version of it. So I wanted to listen to that, and then, we can kind of send ourselves off with that. But Josh, where can people find you if they're looking for you online?
I'm at Joshua V Johnson, or Josh V Johnson on Twitter handle. That's it. That's where I am.
Okay.
And reach out. I know there's guys out there, and please, if I didn't represent what you feel as a man specifically, of course I'm not going to be able to, but if you're feeling some of these same things and hoping stories speak to us in different ways, I'm here for you, brother. So MC, thanks as always. I appreciate it.
So let's listen to this. And thank you for listening. And I'm not going to do end credit outros for this episode. I think that just leaving people with listening to Ali sing and play the guitar is perfect enough. It's Ali Nasser from Miss This Band with Rumors, all about Ben Solo.
Paralyzed, lost my sight, my soul in its darkest night. What have I done? I fell slowly from the sun. Tired eyes, fading smiles, whispers saying I'm not right. Hiding secrets of no one who fell slowly from the sun. I am the light, and I am fire. I am ashes on the funeral pyre. I am a war in a losing fight. I am rumor, and I am light. Tallest tales I've overgrown, a name I wish I had not known. That legacy was mine. Was it a matter of time? For the sunset, I must live with my regret. I'm bound. This is mine to own. I am the light, and I am fire. I am ashes on the funeral pyre. I am a war in a losing fight. I am rumors, and I am light. Thought I was so alone. Stars are calling me home. Something sparking in my soul. I can't deny the reaching out to me. Lost a distant memory out here. All is quiet. Maybe we could get this right.